And we are live. Hello and welcome to what is technically the second episode of the second season of the Benefit of the Dowd podcast. I'm your host, Adam Dowd, and joining me is my usual co-host, Clifton M. Thomas. But also joining me is the editor-in-chief of Android Police, a veteran of over 10 years at that publication. He's basically been there longer than all of my podcasts combined, and he is joining us today. David Ruddock, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's a lot of fun to have you. And Cliff, I don't want to move on without saying hello to you and how are you doing? Well, you know, we have a guest and he's more important than you, so that's kind of how we roll.
Well, it's becoming a theme. I am so tired. I actually was up for 24 hours and I'm drinking lots of caffeine, and we'll see how we are in about 20 minutes.
That's gonna be fun. So David did not sign up for that. What he did sign up for,
roller coaster ride, my friend.
Yeah,
well, I'm all hopped up on Pedialyte, so
I saw that story.
Yeah, not fun.
Well, we should probably move on. But no, so the reason, David, you're here is my podcast has been on hiatus, and we're actually in the last week of that hiatus. I actually have to start working again next week, which is
unfortunate.
But anyway, so the podcast has been on hiatus. Normally, this is the Douding Thomas monthly recap, where we recap everything that happened on the podcast over the last month, but nothing happened. So what did happen was we had Google I/O, which is kind of a big deal. So that's why I wanted to have you come on and tell us all about it. And so that's where we're going to get started. I have a few other stories that I do want to touch on if we have time, but Google I/O could conceivably take up like an entire hour, so I won't rule that out. But anyway, I wanted to start off, and I'm going to start off with you, David. What was your overall impression of Google I/O? And I should caveat that by saying, when I talk about Google I/O, I'm pretty much talking about the keynote. So I'm not a developer, so a lot of that other stuff kind of like glazes over my eyeballs. So what was your overall impression of Google I/O, what we saw and what we experienced and what we felt?
Well, I actually blacked out, so I do hope you guys have some filler prepped. But from what I remember, so actually this I/O, obviously there wasn't an I/O last year. Google canceled at the last minute. At first they went like, oh, we're going to do it digital. And then they realized there's no way we're going to be able to put this together. And they canned it. And then they had a bunch of kind of piecemeal announcements they did over the course of months, which were really hard to amalgamate into a theme, actually. I think Google ended up postponing a lot of announcements and product plans last year. And I think actually that had one benefit, which was it got them a chance to kind of get their shit together collectively and decide what the theme of this year's show is going to be. And also, digital events do have one advantage over true live in person. Even though this was a live broadcast, they allow you to control the narrative much more tightly. So it's much harder to get sidetracked. You've got presenters who know exactly what they're doing, what their time limits are, and you don't have, there's no Q&A, pesky journalists with their pesky questions, always getting in the way. So that was a big advantage they had this year. But I think the theme this year was really one of unity across the Google ecosystem. And that was what I took away personally. Now, I know that, some other people had other thoughts about it, but for me, what I saw was Google trying to assert or reassert its dominance over the many platforms in which it has its hands. So on Android, that was really encompassed to me in the Material You announcement, which was really about, saying, what, we're finally going to have this set of tools and themes for Android that define what Android is, looks, and feels like. And it's not so much about, as I said in the post I wrote about this, it's not about Android being this canvas you paint upon. It's about it being this set of shapes and feelings and objects that you can pull and twist and shade and then kind of make them your own, but that still look and feel and have that overall kind of language that is going to be familiar to anybody using an Android platform product, which might feel very similar to iOS in a way. It's a very kind of Apple concept. You also saw this with things like the new Wear OS, which we haven't really seen yet outside of what are essentially design concepts. Obviously Google is taking Fitbit, it's taking Tizen, and it's taking Wear OS, and it's putting them all together in one basket and saying, this is the only way we can hope to take on Apple and Watch OS. This is the only way this is going to work. And I think, Google has a compelling case to make there, right? None of these companies are going to be able to do that on their own. None of them have been able to. Tizen has been a total disaster on third-party software support, even if Samsung does get some things really right with its wearable platform, especially on the hardware side. I think Samsung has been doing a good job differentiating there. Fitbit obviously has advantages on the health tracking and fitness side. Google has advantages in... I'll get back to you on that. But they did
data?
Yeah, I guess. That would be one. But I would say the Assistant is really their wearable ace in the hole. Granted, it stopped working for basically a year on Wear OS smartwatches, and everybody's just like, well, I guess it's broken now. So that's kind of
unacknowledged that whole time too.
Yeah, it really was. It was not a good situation. Granted, people would have had to been using it to notice. So
it's been a long time since I've had a Wear OS watch. I just haven't worn one in a while. I should probably get back to that. But I was listening, and I don't want to cut you off because you're kind of on a roll there. But I was listening to the All About Android podcast, talking about Google I/O, and they mentioned, on the one hand, there was a lot of optimism, and you'll have to forgive me if I don't remember this because this is 50% into a 3-hour ride this past week, 3-hour bike ride this past weekend. So I might not have been thinking coherently at the time, but there was a lot of optimism about hey, Google and Samsung are getting together and they're putting Fitbit into the mix, and this is going to be great. Whereas and there was also the other side of the coin, honestly, this is kind of what they have to do if they're going to make any type of inroads in the smartwatch space. This is almost like a last-ditch effort. And actually, now that I think about it, I know exactly where I was on this ride when I listened to that part. It's all just such a... anyway, I was very tired. But anyway, so it's this does kind of feel well, Samsung isn't doing it. Google's not doing it. Fitbit's not doing it. Let's just put everything together and see what happens. And so, which side do you think, is this an optimistic thing, where things are gonna be great, or is this kind of a last ditch effort to finally unseat Apple? And I guess the follow up question to that is, will it work?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit like you're in the pizza parlor and you're figuring out you've got 3 ingredients left and you're just putting them all on one pie and hoping it all works. It does definitely feel that way. That said, something's got to go in the oven. So I think that's where Google and Samsung and Fitbit are all at with their wearable products, is they all have little things they can bring to the table. Whether or not those things come together as a palatable user experience, whole other question, and one that we're going to have to wait and see. I think it's going to take a long time. We don't really
know what it means either. I mean, you can say that you're combining Tizen and Wear OS, Wear now, and Fitbit's fitness expertise, but I mean, it was really just conceptual.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this is going to be much messier in practice. Obviously they want to make it look very pretty on the surface. And I think that what we've seen from the interface elements they showed off, Google is giving Wear the fresh coat of paint it so desperately needs. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. The far bigger piece to me is somebody who is using an Apple Watch again. I picked up an iPhone 12 mini last week, and I'm back in the trenches with iOS. The third-party software integration on Watch OS is pretty strong. There aren't a whole lot of new developments happening there, but what does works well. And Apple's first-party software on Watch OS is class leading. There's just no way around it. And I think that's a huge hill to surmount for Google and these guys. And I think that how they do that is, I mean, it's a mystery to me. I hope they come up with some good ideas, but there's definitely a lot of integration, I think, that needs to happen with Android, with Chrome OS, and with the new wearable platform, where Google needs to show a level of seriousness about ecosystem that to date it's really failed to do. Google has shown lip service to ecosystem with Chromebooks and Android and wearables together, but oftentimes those things come across as half-baked because guess what? These are all totally different teams inside Google that really aren't communicating very well with each other and have totally different priorities. Their products simply aren't going after the same audiences and the same functions. The Chrome OS team is concerned with the fact we're shipping, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of education laptops every year. Who do you think our primary concern is? It's not the people who have a Wear OS watch. They're not high on our list. Whereas the Android team is like, our primary concern are the hundreds of vendors shipping our operating system every year. They're not looking at Wear OS and saying, well, the Wear OS team, we've really got to make sure they're getting, they're just attention. So it's a difficult thing. And I think that also gets to another area of ecosystem that I talked about in my post about I/O, which are two areas where Google has shown dominance. And actually, I don't think gets the credit for it. The first one is television. Google and Android TV have slowly taken over the world. Now, in the United States, it's easy to look at our bubble and say, oh, well, you've got Apple TV, you've got Roku, you've got Fire TV. And you're like, okay, there's a healthy competition going on here in America. Outside of America, that healthy competition really doesn't exist. It's Android TV or maybe Tizen. Like if you're buying a Samsung TV and LG's smart web OS things, whatever they call it, ThinQ thing. Other than that, like everybody, all these set-top box providers in other countries, they're choosing Android TV. Most of the TV manufacturers are choosing Android TV. All the boxes are Android TV based. Like that's really, it's actually been a huge success story for Google. Even if you don't like the software, which I personally think it's okay, it works. Google's had a great success there because this is what Android does so well. It's so adaptable, especially globally. Android has been great for that because it supports so many languages. The assistant works in so many regions now. It's a great way to be like, our TV supports voice controls that actually work right out of the box, and we don't have to do anything because it's all on the back end with Google. Just connect it to the internet and go. And we can pick the tiles we put on the front of it, which frankly is all they care about as TV manufacturers and cable providers. Just want to put the content in front of you. So that's been a huge success for Google that is not often touted. The other one is cars. Now, as somebody who's, actually I started using CarPlay for the first time like 4 days ago. I've been very impressed by what Apple has done with CarPlay. I think Apple has gotten ahead of Android Auto in terms of functions and also just usability of interface. I think it is much nicer. I think that it lets you multitask better. And I think that it just serves the set of tasks you do in the car in a more pleasant way. Like I enjoy it. I use Android Auto all the time, and I feel confident when I say I like using CarPlay significantly more.
That's interesting. The last time I used CarPlay was a while ago, and I thought at the time that Android Auto's experience was, at least it worked better for the ecosystem. Maybe it's because I'm so deep into Google's ecosystem.
The thing some people don't understand is that CarPlay now supports third-party apps. You can tell Siri use Google Maps, and it uses Google Maps. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It just works. You do have to specify, which is in itself maybe a little annoying. You can't set a default, right? That's welcome to Apple. But
and you do have to talk to Siri.
You do, but in the car, that's not so bad, right? Because the commands you're using are so basic. You're telling it to go somewhere, you're telling it to listen to something, or telling it to call someone. Those are really the 99.99% of the time, that's what you're doing in the car, right?
Right.
So, but anyway, I'm sidetracking myself here. Google actually has been the sleeper success story in cars, and there are a few reasons for that. Number one, car makers realized 8 or 9 years ago that Android was a great platform to build their infotainment experiences on because it's open source, and once that means you don't have to attribute it anywhere that matters. You don't have to say where you got it. You don't have to put anybody else's brand in there. And so brands like Harman took Android and built experiences they then licensed to a bunch of car makers like Hyundai and Kia, for example, who have been using Harman's system for a long time. I don't know if it's still a Harman-based system they use, but it's still Android-based. And so car makers like them and Honda Acura and a few others have been using Android in this way for a long time. Google semi-officially sanctions this. There are some guidelines they have for like semi-official automotive partners, but few years back, they announced Android Automotive, and at the time, they didn't really say anything about it. They're just like, well, there's an Android for cars now, and everybody's like, what does that mean? And Google's like, we're not really saying at this point, but it's a thing, and we're going to hold it. We're going to hold manufacturers to a set of standards, as we do with all of our Android platforms. But what happens, you have to remember, the automotive industry doesn't just move slowly. It is positively glacial in terms of product development because the vehicles, at a minimum, you're looking at a 5-year product life cycle, but probably 7, 10, or even 12 years for a lot of these cars. So you have to plan things way out in advance to make sure your supply chain works and make sure your product dev lines up with supply chain and manufacturing. It's fairly complicated stuff. As you can imagine. Android Automotive, though, has emerged the clear winner ahead of every other platform now. Ford will use them. GM will use them. Stellantis, which includes the Fiat Chrysler group and the Peugeot group, will use them. And with those,
Nissan, no, or and Mitsubishi now too, right?
Yes. So there are a number of partners on board with it now, and that list is only going to grow. But with those 3 major auto groups, they have the lion's share of all cars sold in the United States already, and a ton globally as well. These brands are huge globally, and that to me is like, you can't even begin to explain how much negotiating and coordination it took to pull that off to win those deals. Those are big commitments. And you know how many of those commitments Apple has? None. At least none that are public. And guess what? That's massive. And so Google has very quietly asserted itself in that space. I've used Android Automotive, I think, as a platform, as a canvas, which is what I would describe automotive as. Automotive is a canvas automakers paint on because automakers want things to look like their brand, their experience. It is ours. But they also want Google Assistant. They want Google Maps. They want those services that car buyers are going to expect, like a mapping solution they can talk to that will just take them to places they need to go, find a charging station, find a gas station, tell them the fastest route, let them know if there's a speed trap, work with their music services, keep their accounts synced up, work with their smart home stuff, all that kind of stuff. And automakers are only going to value this more as time goes on. So that to me is an area where they've really, really quietly become the big player. And I don't think anybody really saw that coming. I've talked to the Android Automotive guys for years at like MWC, and it was always like, we have a lot more to share, don't worry. And after a while, I'm like, okay, I actually believe you guys. And with that, I think that's the kind of the big takeaway for me from I/O was that Google is showing us piece by piece by piece, don't worry, we are getting our ducks in a row here. There is a best Android for phones. There's a best Android for cars. There's a best Android for wearables. There's a best Android for TVs. Now, the question is, can they wrap all this together successfully, unify it with hardware, and then make it all play nicely together in ways where you're like, oh, that just works with this because I already have that, which is kind of the feeling you get with Apple products, right? So pulling all that together is obviously Google's goal. Whether they accomplish that, again, wholly separate issue. But to me, it showed a level of seriousness about it that I don't think we've seen before.
That's awesome. I mean, and honestly, this is going to be the easiest podcast I've ever had to edit because I just have to put on David's feed and go, and this is going to be great. But no, I mean, you honestly, you had a lot to say, and it all makes perfect sense. And honestly, that's more than I got out of Google I/O because honestly, like I said, my eyes glazed over like half of it. Like Lambda, I know how to spell Lambda, but I mean,
a lot of it is pretty boring.
Yeah, I mean, do I need to talk to a paper airplane? I'm not sure that I do, but no, like it was really good to get that kind of. I'm so glad you're here because it was really great to get all that insight, put into a nice, neat little package. It's almost like you do this for a living, David. It's really weird, but all right. So now, Cliff, I want to get kind of your impressions of Google I/O and what you took away from it, even though you have not the slightest prayer of measuring up to what David just did. So, yeah, go for it.
No, I don't think I can take all those disparate parts and put it into one nice little. It almost felt like an essay. The way I used to write it in college, where you
almost as though I wrote an article about it.
Almost.
So yeah, I think all I watched was just the keynote. All this was technically my first year attending Google I/O. Thanks, Google, for making it free.
True
Yeah,
story.
it was definitely a nice narrative. It was easy to, as far as watching the keynote, yeah, like you were saying, to have your eyes glaze over. And I think what David said is absolutely correct. That it was putting into place and better explaining things that they had been working on that we really haven't seen yet. Things like Android Automotive, what we're doing with Wear OS, because there have been questions about that for 3 years. The continuance of development of Android and making it, I guess, a little more homogenized and giving, while still giving OEMs the tools they need to customize it themselves, but then wrapping it all together to say this is where we're going. But I think that the common thing really was AI and the assistant throughout the entire thing, because I guess maybe that's the only thing bringing them together in the end.
Yeah, and obviously that's one area where Google is also excelling, is in the department of AI. Now, I want to kind of transition back to more of like the what the consumers are going to be dealing with, and right off the bat, you've got Android 12, which they introduced, the Material You concept, which is a pretty major renovation over what has been done before. Some have said that it's the biggest renovation of Android yet, and I still gotta agree that the Material Design 1.0, I guess, was a much bigger deal, because that kind of brought everything into like a cohesive whole. Whereas Material U is more actually about taking that cohesive whole and making it more about you, to go with the phrase. Now, personally, I am not a big UI guy. Like, I don't get really excited over like UI changes, like, oh, this button's going to be bigger. Yay. There were some really badass stuff that I saw in there. Like the one thing that really stands out even to this day is the software pseudo privacy shutter buttons that you're going to get for your camera and your microphone, just shutting that down. And so like that's one thing that like kind of made me raise my eyebrows a little bit. But for a lot of the Material You stuff, and I want to start with you, Cliff, because you're the designer here. How were you feeling about the Material You redesign, the relook of Android 12?
So I haven't had a chance to use it hands-on. I threw it on my Pixel 4a 5G because I have the luxury of it not being my only phone.
Right.
I mean, the core of it still feels like Android. If you've used Android before, you won't feel lost. It's I'm always hesitant to comment too much, because this is just the first beta, and
Sure.
so I think a lot of things that we see will either be toned down, or you might not even see. The things that you see in the first beta may be gone by the time it releases in September, assuming that's when it does. I have to assume, based on their cadence, that's what they're going to do. The things that I'm liking are things that they've added that just make it feel a little more consistent from app experience to app experience. Things like the boot splash that you get, where it creates one even if the developer hasn't added one. I shouldn't say boot splash. I'm sorry. The splash screen when you launch an app. There are little animations that they've added that feel a little more polished, between things like swiping between your open apps, closing things. I hate to say it, because this is a little cliche, but it feels a little more iOS like, especially with the large radius rounded corners. And there's a lot more white space, if you want to call it that I think again just makes it feel, I guess, more polished. And it is nice that you can do theming even if it lets you do questionable theming. I'm not a fan of the stuff that's in there so far. Let's see, you've got like a Samsung Squircle thing going on, an octagon, and you can, let's see, the shape, the icon look kind of like the Duo and some other things. So it's interesting. I think it is a little jarring when you've switched from even Android 11, because it is a pretty big visual change, but it does still at its core feel like Android. So those are just a few of my thoughts, having used it for I guess what was it? I guess it's been about a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm waiting for my OnePlus 9 Pro review to drop next week. Then I'm going to install Android 12 beta onto that, so I can start getting
Have they
some
fixed
use
that
out of
yet,
it.
so it doesn't break your phone?
I believe they have, actually. I believe they have. I'll need to read up on that a little bit. But and hey, we've got TCL phones coming in the not too distant future, and they will be supporting the beta as well, which I thought was really cool. It seemed like they had a lot of manufacturers like on board for the beta, like right at launch, which you don't often see coming from Google.
Yeah, one thing I was wondering about real quickly with that, because I see a manufacturer like Samsung isn't on board with that, so I'm wondering, and this is one of the where I forget all of the different names that the Android or that Google has for, but the underlying file system where they can do Delta updates without having to do like a complete OS install. Is that what just makes it easier for them to do an OS level update like that versus I know Samsung's still on the old way of doing system level updates. Maybe I'm completely wrong with that. But
No, you're right about the Samsung not supporting seamless updates yet, and Google actually pushed back the requirement on that. I don't think it's required on Android 12. I think they pushed it to 13. Don't quote me on that, but I know they pushed it back at least one version, and I guarantee Samsung was why, because Samsung was probably like, yeah, we're not going to make that, guys.
Exactly. They've got such deep level stuff, I think, with Knox that I think it makes them difficult for them to transition to that. That's always been my working theory that has no basis in reality except just my assumptions.
Except based on your observations.
Right, it just seems the whole beta thing seems so awkward to me because you have they're working so closely with Samsung with Wear OS, and I know that Android or that I think Samsung is contributing more and more to Android as far as the open source part of it as well. So it's just weird for them to be a partner so close on one thing and then to not even offer the beta on their phones. And that's where I was kind of like, is it?
Samsung really likes to maintain this illusion that they are really the proprietor of their software experience and that Google is merely a partner and that One UI is its own operating system. And so they release One UI betas. They don't release Android betas. They're One UI betas. You know, Android is just an underlying platform. You have the whole Samsung experience there, you know, to really lean on. But I think there are probably some technical limitations there too. I think you're probably right. Knox plays into it to some extent. I couldn't speak to that technically. You know, somebody like John Sawyer would probably be able to talk about that a lot better than I would. But I think that Samsung, you know, for as slow as they have been historically with software updates, I think that they have gotten so much faster that them not participating in the Android betas, I think at this point is more about public image than it is about technical limitation. I think that they want absolute control even over the beta software experience that they release. Samsung is a very, you know, to understand Samsung, you have to understand a whole different culture around corporate, the corporate world that is unique to Korea, and how they view their products and how they view their control over them. That is just so different than a lot of other companies out there. And I think to them, it is much more about, we will present the Samsung experience when the Samsung experience is ready to be presented. And we will not do it before then. Versus we don't want to participate in the Android beta. So I think that's a big part of it. Also, Samsung is powerful enough that they can afford not to give a shit. Yes, exactly.
Very true.
Yeah. And well, and it's also
create
interesting
support issues and things like that, even though there is and you know, you're signing on to basically blow away your warranty by doing that, I think, but still it's just something they don't even have to think about. So
I think it's also interesting, like how many fingerprints, you know, Samsung fingerprints you're starting to see in Android these days. Like not only just the cooperation with Wear and, you know, not only the but like even, you know, Google altering its messaging app on Samsung phones so that it looks more like One UI, so that Samsung can then adopt that as like the primary message. Now, I mean, it makes for a better consumer experience overall, but still, there's a lot of influence going both ways in that particular relationship, and it kind of makes you wonder, like, I mean, I don't want to use a crude reference, but it kind of makes you wonder where, and this is actually kind of like a 80s dude reference, but it makes you wonder who's wearing the pants in that family. You know what I mean? It kind of makes you wonder, like, who's, I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to dig myself into any deeper a hole than I already am in. But it's interesting seeing like how involved Samsung and Google are getting with each other these days. Considering Samsung is far and away the biggest provider of Android phones, and Google is the one that's kind of supplying the building blocks for that. So, David, while I have you here, and I think we can go ahead and transition away a little bit from Android, from Android beta. I want to talk about Cliff. Actually, he makes me look good because that's like his job. But he pointed out to me that you got to take a drive in an Android automotive car, the Polestar. Shoot, what was it? Yeah, the Polestar 2. And you got to drive with that for a day, and you kind of wrote about that. That was back in August, if I remember correctly. But I wanted to, in light of, since we're out talking about all things Google, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of brag about that, like, neater, I got to drive that car or whatever. Just talk about the experience in general. If you can.
I can brag even more, actually. I did get to, I got a loaner for 4 days about 2 weeks ago. From Polestar, the great folks at Polestar, great PR team over there, and honestly, a great vehicle, I can say, overall. As a vehicle enthusiast myself, I really enjoyed driving it. Great EV, definitely recommend you check one out if you are in the market for something in kind of the Model 3 size class. But anyway, on the kind of subject of Android automotive and what that kind of looks and feels like, because very few people have gotten to experience it at this point. You have to drive a Polestar 2 in order to see it. Volvo will be coming out with a version of the XC40, I want to say. There will be a full EV that will also have Android automotive, but I believe that car was delayed. Don't quote me on that either, but I don't think it's out yet. Anyway, Android automotive is effectively a over-the-top layer in the car, is the way you can think of it. So it doesn't run the CAN bus or anything. It's not responsible for like real-time OS vehicle operations. That is all still handled by a proprietary software that sits underneath automotive. Android, automotive is, like I said, an OTT kind of system. So it controls the entire infotainment stack, essentially, aside from the gauge cluster. The gauge cluster is still on the real-time operating system. But Android Automotive can project into the gauge cluster is the way to think of it, the way it technically works. So when you're looking at the central infotainment UI and the central cluster, or the in the center stack of the Polestar 2, that is all Android Automotive all the time. So how does that work? You sign into it with your Google account. There's a fairly clunky sign-in method right now. I read
about that.
I don't enjoy it. Google says they're working on making it better, which is my way, which to me read as, we understand it's not very good, but we can't fix it right now. You can sign into Spotify. You can sign into YouTube Music, which obviously is linked to your Google account. I think that the third-party app support is like, there will be more soon. The problem right now is that Android Auto apps and Android Automotive apps are not the same thing.
Yeah, they're built on different tech.
Amazingly confusing. So they're all Android apps, right? That's all Android. But the problem is the actual guidelines for developers and specifications are different. So Google actually announced at I/O this year that they are going to unify those specs so the developers will develop once and deploy once for automotive and auto. So that problem will theoretically go away. And so you will be able to get things like Waze on your Android automotive vehicle, which is not currently available. You just have Google Maps. So that's one thing. There are a total of 6 apps available for Android automotive right now. 2 of which I think are basically useless. Like they have iHeartRadio, I think, which I'm like, who uses that in 2021? But I'm guessing one of the OEMs was like, we really want a radio app. And Google's like, okay. Let's go find a partner.
Yeah,
So-
and if you're gonna go with the radio app, you may as well go with the with one of the only podcasts that ever been downloaded 1 billion times.
Yeah. So
Well, it is beneficial to them in a way because the Polestar 2 has such limited sales compared to something like
Very
the
much
broader
so.
Volvo line, right? So it's
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's a rolling test bed, but it kind of is. But
it is.
Isn't everything with Android?
Polestar would not like that characterization, but it's a rolling test bed for Google. I don't think it's a
Right.
rolling test bed for Polestar. I think Polestar has
Right.
mostly got their stuff sorted out.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have any problems with the car at all. But on the Google side of things, I think the big questions people have are, how does this work with my phone? And in what way am I going to recognize this as Android? And the answers to both of those questions are relatively disappointing. So in terms of the way it works with your phone, it can use your phone as a data connection once your in-car LTE subscription expires. I don't know if it can use it as a wireless hotspot, but I believe if you plug in via USB, your phone will tether it as a data connection. So your car still has data connectivity. So there's that. But otherwise, it's just like Bluetooth hands-free. Like, you get all the same stuff you normally would. It does do text messages, obviously. All the kind of basic stuff you would expect. Handles phone calls. But other than that, the way you recognize it as Android to me is the way that Assistant works, which is Assistant has pretty good control over the vehicle itself. So you can like set the cabin temperature. You can turn on the heaters. You can, what other vehicle commands does it do? I think there are a few other more basic ones it can do. But
I saw you do a recirc command in one of your in the video.
You can turn on the air recirculation with the Assistant.
Which I mean, I think I'm speaking for everyone when I say thank God. Because I go by that thing.
You know, honestly, in the 4 days I spent with the car, I did not use the Assistant once for a single vehicle command because I'm just like, why would I? I set the air temperature once, I set my mirrors, and I never touch any of that stuff almost ever again, unless it's like
automated anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Like otherwise, you know, Google Maps feels like Google Maps on Android, which to me is the best thing about the whole car because you get proper Google Maps with updated POIs, live traffic. You get access to charging stations, which is like really good data. Google has far and away the best data on that stuff. You know, it integrates with the range of the car, which for an EV is important. So it'll tell you like, hey, this charge station's too far away from you to make it. That's not going to work. It'll tell you like the route you've got like set is too far for you to make it on a charge. You need to charge in between. So it is smart enough to understand that kind of stuff, which is the sort of thing you would hope Google would be able to do with the data the car gives it. So this does get into other things where like it could be smarter yet, but the amount of data that the car gives Google is obviously limited because the car makers are very concerned about sharing data with Google. They do not want Google to amass enough data to build a better car than anyone else can build because they have all of the data now and they can say, oh yeah, we figured all of this out. So there is definitely some push and pull there. And I recall talking to Polestar. They were very adamant about like, there's no data sharing about your driving habits and things like that. You know, we don't share any of that with Google, etc. So there's stuff that Google isn't getting that could be useful to you, like determining like, this is how you typically drive. So like, actually you can't make it there because you're kind of an asshole on the road.
Right. Yeah.
You know, they can't tell you that. Otherwise though, like I would say the automotive experience is it's still growing. Google has some work to do. The Assistant experience is largely seamless as long as you don't lose internet connectivity. You lose internet connectivity, you can do in-vehicle commands to control certain vehicle systems, and that's about it.
That's about it.
The voice processing does happen on car. It is using the actual CPU in the car to process the voice commands, but without internet connectivity, the Assistant is fairly like limited in what it can do, which is something that did frustrate me a couple of times, because I was doing my test drives in areas where cell connectivity did drop in and out, and that is when I had the most number of issues with it. Thankfully, in my 4-day loaner, I didn't have a lot of the bugs I did during the press fleet launch last year in August, which saw me signed out of accounts randomly. Songs would stop playing for no reason. Google would misunderstand me completely on certain commands. Like, that stuff all went away. I think they ironed out most of it, and I heard from Polestar they'd had several updates since then. So I would say you won't feel like you're a beta tester driving this car, because the infotainment is still so much smarter than what you get in most cars. That said, it is fully touch based, which to a lot of people, like if you've not driven a Tesla, especially, moving to a fully touch based car system is like, you will feel like, I really wish I had some buttons. For certain things. Like, to me, there is the gold standard for climate control is a dial. Just
absolutely.
It's so natural. It just works. I don't understand why we've switched away from it. But car makers,
because the future.
Well, and also car makers just want fewer things that you can break off and snap, and little fewer pieces is better for them.
Absolutely. It's also, if you're doing international vehicle, where you have right versus left, it's few things you have to mold and think about. And I watched a really funny. Have you watched Terry Monroe live or Monroe live?
I've watched some of his videos.
I watched his. I think it was his final wrap up, and also his initial first drive with the Polestar 2, and his experience with Google Maps, with Android Automotive, and he was looking, where's my maps? I can't find them. Then it popped up and said, sign into your Google account in order to access your maps. But I don't want to sign into a Google account. It's just, he was so old manning it. And I'm like, for as smart of a guy as he is, it's just really funny to see people deal with something that's where it's so integrated into an ecosystem. Like
it says something that the one Polestar, I live 5 minutes from Google, and the one Polestar 2 I've seen has an Android Automotive sticker on the rear glass. It's literally an engineer on the team who has the car. And it's like, well, that speaks to the current audience for the vehicle.
Yeah. So I want to ask two questions before we move away from this. First question is how well does the Polestar talk to a paper airplane? No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to ask that question. No, I am kind of curious, like, just because of like how dominant they are in the United States as a whole, how does Android Automotive work with iPhones? I think that's a fairly relevant question.
It is. You're right. So I would say that if you use an iPhone, it won't work any worse with your phone. The only thing is the sign-in process is slightly clunkier yet.
Excellent.
So you have to go through, I think, like a slightly one additional layer of authentication, because Google sign-in on iOS is just like a little bit more involved than it is on Android. So you might need I don't want to speak to it because I haven't done it yet, but you can sign in. Right. Otherwise, it should just work like any Bluetooth car device does. You wouldn't experience any weirdness. If you're signed into the Google app on your iPhone, it should just work. Like Google Maps should sync fine. YouTube Music should sync fine. But obviously, like, there is no Apple Music app for Android Automotive. There's no Apple Podcasts app. There is no iMessage integration. You would just get like normal SMS formatting. So there would be issues there.
Interesting.
They wouldn't be serious issues, but it would just be like, well, the kind of things you would probably expect. Now, would a normal consumer be unhappy with that experience compared to an Android phone? Honestly, I don't think they'd even notice. I really don't. So I think the integration is fine. And the car has a Qi charger, so it charges both of them just fine. And I think that to me is the nicest thing about it is I don't have to plug in my phone when I get in the car. I just put it on the little Qi pad and I go. And that is honestly, compared to Android Auto or CarPlay, a great advantage. I don't have to wait for the phone to do anything because the car's already doing it.
Nice. Okay, awesome. So I do have a few things that I wanted to. Do either of you have any final IO thoughts that you wanted to share before we? I do have just a handful of other kind of big news stories that happened over the month that I want to touch on, just at least briefly if we can. But anyway, so I'll open the floor to you first, David. If you have any final thoughts on Google I/O, now would be the time to share them.
It's pronounced Googlio.
Googlio, gotcha. So yeah, no. Anyway, okay. So those are your final thoughts. I think that was a little bit of a wasted opportunity, but we'll go with it. Clifton, what about your?
That's what's called a bunt.
Yeah, yeah.
I will say, and this goes back to me having a hard time remembering all the different Google projects, but there
were so many
in-person experience with the 3D mapping of the other person's body across what looks to be a mirror.
The what was that called? Starline or something like that? I want to say.
It had it didn't have a name that was associated with the experience at all. Which
right.
Yeah, but I don't know how it is to actually use it in person, but the demonstrations and their nicely curated video looked very impressive, and they said nice things about it. So I would be curious to see how that actually gets integrated into. I know it's one of their like moonshot projects, right? But it's a neat idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I look forward to poor man's holodeck.
Exactly.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, it did look really cool. I mean, but it also, I want to say, didn't they say there was like $5,000 worth of hardware on both ends of that, like just to like make it, like it was insane. Like, and like if you want to talk to grandma, that's cool, but it's going to cost you.
It's like a holodeck and a Peloton mirror.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go.
Computer,
so okay,
no.
So before we move on to our other topics, I do have to do some patron shout outs. I appreciate you putting up with this, David. But anybody who is a patron at the $5 level or more gets a shout out at every Douding Thomas monthly recap. And of course, we start off every patron shout out with the same person, Cliff, who is for some reason still paying me to be on this show. So thank you very much, Cliff. And we've got Fat Produce, or I haven't made a decision whether I'm going to call him Fat Produce or Andrew Wallace. So I guess he gets a double this time too. But anyway, thank you very much, Andrew. And we have Johan Bresky, Josh Stone, we have Michael Kepper, and Kepper or Keeper, I always forget. Anyway, it's fine. It's fine. No, and we have Mike Hahn and Neil Wilson, Scott Brady, and Zachary Palmer. Thank you very much to all of you for contributing to the Patreon, which is awesome and helping to pay the bills around here. Actually, paying one very small bill, but still paying bills. I very much appreciate it. So, outside of the world of Googlio, there was one announcement that we got at the beginning of the month, which I honestly don't know how much time we should spend on this. I'm thinking maybe 30 seconds, but the Google is talking about doing a new entertainment hub that's going to, in the words of Android Police, make Android tablets suck less. This is called. This is a new kind of like it's a side panel from what I saw. It's going to replace the Google Discover on tablets, and it's going to be called, what is the name of it? I'm browsing and I can't find the name of it. It was Entertainment Space.
I was going to say it's RPU Increaser. Actually, is the official name.
Just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
Let's not use that anymore.
No, I just mean this is just a better way for Google to make money on the average Android tablet user. Which, let's be serious, the average Android tablet user is probably not a high information person. So
okay, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, yeah. So like, now I read over the story like 2 or 3 times, just trying to figure out like what this was and kind of why. But like, I didn't see anything about any type of like release schedule on this. Have you heard anything about that, David? Like, when can we expect this to show up on Android tablets for the dozen or so people that own them?
Whenever Walmart announces a new one, because Walmart is the launch partner. So that's like what you can expect. It's
Gotcha.
Really actually quite depressing overall. This is a blatant cash grab. It is Google saying, you know what? I'm pretty sure we could make better rev share on people signing up for Disney Plus than showing them Google Discover articles. That's literally the play here. And YouTube TV and YouTube Premium and Netflix and everything else. That's all it's about, is turning your Android tablet into a Google TV home screen. That's pretty much what it is.
I would like to see some type of integration between like an entertainment space and, the Chromecast with Google TV on it, like, so that whatever's here automatically shows up here, and it's like some kind of nice tightly. I don't believe that Google's going to do that, at least not to begin with. But like that would be really nice to see. Like, and this is exactly what we were talking about with Google I/O. Was Google trying to like get all these things to kind of work together. This seems like such low-hanging fruit. Like
it does.
Conceptually, it doesn't sound that different from what they're doing with what is their new? It's the Google TV app for Android or Google TV itself, where they're putting featured content in front of you. It's just on tablets.
Yeah.
Yep. So 100%. This is
featured content.
It is just a money grab, and sadly, that speaks to, I would say, the kind of the competing interests inside Google, which are the interest of the viable business arm of Google, and then the aspirational kind of user experience arm, and the fact that guess who wins every fight.
And you know what? This is a wonderful way to segue over into another story that kind of came out this month. And David, I'm sorry, I do have to kind of knock you down a peg a little bit, because
feel free. I love it. I live for it.
Samsung released its Galaxy Upcycling program. It was actually like towards the end of last month, but I am the author, and as far as I know, this is still true. I am the author of the only step-by-step instructional web page that shows you how to actually turn on Samsung Galaxy Upcycling, and that includes Samsung.com, by the way. Because I was given this assignment from Android Central, and I'm like,
the trick Samsung doesn't want you to know.
No, seriously, like, so like my workflow is I have a full-time day job, and then like I have these assignments from a couple of other outlets that this is my nights and weekends work. And so like I sat down with this Galaxy Upcycling thing the night before it was due, because I'm like, how long could this possibly take? And so like I read article after article after article from publications from probably Android Police. I don't remember if I specifically looked at that site or not, but The Verge, CNET, Tom's Guide, even Samsung.com, all of which were saying, here's how to turn your old Samsung phone into a Galaxy, into a sensor. Not one of them had freaking step-by-step instructions on how to do this. Every single one of them said, well, you use SmartThings Lab from the SmartThings app. Where the hell is the Smart Labs thing in this app? And like, even then you have to like, anyway. So,
Adam, how long have you been holding on to this?
The article published about a week and a half ago, so about that long. Anyway, so today, the only reason I'm talking about this is because today we got a post from iFixit talking about like the dramatic reinvention of the Galaxy Upcycling program from the time that it was announced, which was back in 2017, until today. Like Samsung first talked about this for almost 4 years ago, when they said, we're going to help you turn your old phones into usable things, and you can use like your sensors and stuff like that. You've got an old crappy phone laying around, you can use that as a baby monitor or some crap like that. And then and iFixit was like, that sounds great, let's do that, because iFixit is all about keeping reducing e-waste and keeping stuff active. And so Samsung said, we're going to unlock bootloaders, and we're going to let you do anything you want to these things, and you're going to be able to do thousands of things with these phones. Then this year, Samsung actually came out with the program and said, okay, so it needs to be a Galaxy S9 or above, and you can turn it into a dog barking monitor or a light sensor, and that's it. And like everyone's like, yeah. and so that's kind of what happened. So basically, not only are you not using like super old phones that are like gathering dust on your shelf, the Galaxy S9 is still a legitimately decent phone today. Like you could get away with using that as as a phone. So not only are they requiring like fairly new devices, they're also requiring that you have a Samsung device to activate, because you have to scan a QR code from the new device, but you can only get to that QR code if you're using a Samsung device, or if you go to AndroidCentral.com and look at my article, because I put a screenshot of the QR code on there. But anyway, so basically the gist of it is iFixit was very angry that Samsung, put out this whole deal with their logo on it, like, saying, hey, iFixit endorses us, yada, yada, yada. And then it kind of turned into like a bait and switch, mainly because Samsung couldn't figure out how to make money out of an upcycling program unless they had like some kind of super smart things tie-in. And boy, that was a lot of words just to introduce that topic.
Adam, you ready for it?
Yeah, go for it. Hit me.
Oh,
send me a high quality of that so I can put that in.
This is like Nike offering to upcycle shoes to orphans. It's just, it was never going to work. I don't believe it. I never believed it. I never will believe it.
I just thought it was funny that like Samsung went from this like total altruistic, like we really genuinely care about the environment. We want to make sure that we're not just throwing away legions of smartphones after their 2-year contract is up. And that went to, how do we make money off of that? And then they said, okay, now forget all that. We're going to do this instead.
It's more like, can you imagine your Air Force One is now a hat?
Well, that's good for that
and
topic.
not just a hat, but a silly hat.
Let's move on. And I think we only have really time for one more article, one more actually pair of articles. But I really want to talk about this because I'm kind of passionate about it. But this month saw the first Starlink reviews coming out. Starlink is the internet broadband service that Elon Musk is providing through SpaceX with the what are they up to? Like 1,000 satellites now that are like spinning around the globe at 90 minutes per revolution, and they're
I don't know.
down.
Elon's got a lot of shit in space.
He does, including an extra car. Go figure. But anyway, but I just thought it was interesting that we were starting to see the Starlink reviews coming out. We had one from Android Central. We had one from The Verge. The one from Android Central is just like, I have to say, our internal chat at Android Central, I joked with the author. I said, you lost me literally halfway through the first sentence, which is, as a fan of living in rural Kansas. And I'm like, I have to be honest with you, dude. I've never been a fan of living in rural anything. But anyway,
hey.
But anyway, so there was that. Like his review came back like SpaceX is actually pretty good, and I'm really enjoying my time with it. And then Nilay Patel over at, it was Nilay, right? Who did the Verge? Yeah, Nilay Patel right. Put up Starlink at his house. He's like, so like it's okay, but And the only thing I had against Nilay Patel's review was he did say about halfway through the 70,000 words that The Verge usually puts towards a review, he said something to the effect of, this is a short-term review, so I didn't put the satellite dish in the absolute optimal spot, so bear that in mind while you read the rest of this. And like on one hand, I kind of get that, but on the other hand, if you're gonna shit on something, you may as well put forth the effort to like make it not shitty. But anyway, so and his basic.
You gotta think though that not everyone that uses this is going to put it in the optimal position.
They are
not.
Okay, if you're dropping $500 down and $99 a month for good internet, I think you're going to want to make it as good as possible. Or am I wrong there? Or like, Am I just like too much of my father's son that like I'm eager to crawl onto the chimney with my ladder?
What's funny to me about
go ahead.
I was just going to say, what's funny about it is that they provide almost no guidance too, from what I understand. And I think I read.
Yeah, they have like IKEA like instructions that come with them, like put red plug into red button, and I don't even think there's words actually. If I remember correctly, the Android Central review said there weren't any words on the instructions.
Like an IKEA flat pack, you're just like, oh, there's a man.
I believe you mean it's been globally translated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, but see, I'm excited about this because, like, you know, I am one of the 1% in America where I actually have like 4 different broadband choices where I live. So, like, I don't have the problem that most of the rest of the country does. But at the same time, I recognize that if you live out in a rural country, and there are people that like living out there, I'm not going to judge them, but I don't think that they should be forced to use shitty internet at the same time. So I'm kind of on board with Starlink and like what they want to do. And so I was really excited to start reading the reviews of this service, which is just in its beta phase at the moment. But so I just wanted to, you know, throw that out there. And I know actually it's funny because between Cliff and I, you are decidedly more rural than I am, and yet I think your internet like takes my internet's lunch money like every day.
Were the beneficiary of the Obama era broadband initiatives where they were giving, what am I trying to say?
Subsidies.
Subsidies. They were giving out. They were giving money to municipalities.
They were basically just rolling out rolls of fiber to random towns.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I went from, I think my available internet was about 30 megabits per second down if you paid the top tier to, and now I have 1 gigabit down, and I live in a town with 300 people with the option for simultaneous, which is badass.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's reasonable. I think I pay, and I just pay for internet, so there's no content on top of that, but I think it's $90.
All right, well, I have a Target, and I can drive to it, and it's like 5 minutes away, so it's there. All right?
No, seriously, David, you've never been to his town, but he doesn't even know how to spell Target where he's from. Like, the nearest hotel to his house was a 45-minute drive.
Target is spelled Walmart.
It was Cliff actually lives in a comically small town. It's actually rather funny, and the fact that he has internet that probably is better than both of ours combined is just a little weird. But anyway, so David, do you have any thoughts on like Starlink and on the idea of like rural broadband not being crappy? And
so I like many things, I can bring it to a car analogy, but I will say I agree with Nilay's conclusion, which is that Starlink is a byproduct of a broadband infrastructure that has failed rural America.
Yeah.
And that is why it exists. And that's actually a really bad reason for it to exist. Like, this shouldn't have happened in the first place. And to me, that's kind of like, you know, you remember during the Bush era when like flex fuel came around and everybody is like E85, E85, E85. And it's like, well, the fact that E85 is the solution to this problem really shows that the problem itself has some root causes that we need to address, not that we should come up with a solution to the problem. Like, the problem shouldn't exist in the first place, right? Exactly. That's how I feel about Starlink. And I mean, aside the performance issues I saw in Nilay's review, like with jitter and stuff, like understandably, that's not going to matter as much as somebody in a rural setting where really you're concerned about like getting a good Netflix stream and being able to download large files. That doesn't matter as much. But if you're trying to position this as a credible alternative to true home broadband, it's obviously not. Jitter and stuff matters a lot for gaming and more intensive real-time applications. Like, if your ping is bouncing all over the place, like, good luck doing anything where real-time connectivity matters. It's just not going to work right. Like I bet
a live stream podcast, for example.
Exactly. And stuff like that, I think like it shows like the real weaknesses. To me, it's kind of like, you know, Starlink is a guy who has like does nothing but shoulder day at the gym, and his calves are like the size of like toothpicks. And I say that as a total fat guy myself, but like it's just like to me, it's like it's funny because it's like, well, yeah, you've got one part of this like pretty well figured out, it seems like, aside from the whole scalability issue, which actually seems to be like the bigger problem. But in terms of solving, in terms of the actual like capability of it, the bottleneck of it is very concerning to me. I think that it would be a great solution for a lot of rural households, especially ones where, you know, expansion of like cellular networks is very difficult because of terrain, which is a real concern in a lot of places like Appalachia, where you have lots of hills, lots of trees, lots of natural barriers that make getting things out there really hard. Something like Starlink could really work well for that. But to me, it is a much narrower use case than just broadband anywhere. That is not what it offers. What it offers is a much, much, much better version of the satellite internet that you can already get that's been brought into basically 2020. It's the concept from way back when, but we've made it way less awful than it used to be, which is great. But again, serves that slice of the population who have these more specific needs, which could probably be addressed if we fix some other things that were kind of fundamental to the broadband problems we have in this country right now.
It is interesting that continuously the Silicon Valley solution to the problems with rural broadband and then in third world countries is to put something in the air or in the vacuum of space.
I live in Silicon Valley and I have one ISP choice. I pay $90 a month for gigabit down from Comcast, but I get 40 megs up, and that is all I can get because Comcast, and that's my only option. I pay them $90 a month for that wonderful service with a 1 terabyte data cap. Woohoo!
My father was the CTO of the county where my parents live in until he retired in the last like 5 years. But fighting to get competition was one of the things he really pushed, and it's almost impossible because especially when you have a state government that pushes back against it, and there's just so many hurdles that you don't even think about until you start getting into like local and state politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oof. Yeah, meanwhile, I just pick from whoever's cheapest for me. No, I'm just kidding. No, I've actually been very lucky in that I have a unlimited, no data cap broadband provider here that isn't shitty. Although actually for the last month and a half, it's been a little spotty, but that's why I can call them and say, hey, I can switch over to these guys or these guys or these guys. And suddenly my internet gets better. Isn't it funny how that works? But okay. Anyway, so David, thank you so much for coming on. I know we've kept you a little bit longer than I said I was going to.
No, it's fine. It's an absolute pleasure.
And it was a pleasure. And you are joining the ranks of people that I have podcasted with before I actually meet you in person, which I think is it's a very large and distinguished club actually at this point. But hopefully we can rectify that at CES. Oh, one thing I wanted to ask: what's Android Police's position on MWC? I'm kind of curious.
We're not going. I'm pretty sure it's going to get canceled in the last minute.
Okay. Well, why? Just because like literally everybody has decided to not go there?
It's a game of chicken between the Spanish government and everybody organizing the show at this point. And I think the egg on the face that would be trying to put it on will outweigh the very few tourist dollars that Barcelona will pull in from putting it on. So I think shame will eventually win out.
Okay. All right. So you're not thinking digital. You're thinking just canceled altogether?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, then CES 2022, I guess. Then we'll. But all right, cool. Well, David, now is our time to roll out the red carpet for you and let you pimp your stuff and let everybody know where they can read about you or hear about you or see you or whatever you want to brag about.
You can just follow me on Twitter at RDRV3 at your own peril.
Okay, fair enough. And we can also
it's a very
read your
spicy
awesome
account
stuff.
sometimes, I will say. I like
it. It is, but I like it. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, David, for coming on and having a chat with us. Thank you very much, Cliff, for not only coming on, but I'm going to say it again, paying for the privilege to come on and chat. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in, albeit briefly, on this, all the patrons who signed in on this live chat. And for those of you who are listening to the high quality, sup? And that's going to do it for now. And I want to thank you for listening and for giving us the benefit of the doubt.